Hello everyone, thanks for the click. Welcome to a new lesson. So as you can see, today we are going to talk about lesson plan. This is a very important lesson for all those who want to apply for teaching either in private sector or public sector. And also it is important for novice teachers and those who have no idea about lesson planning or how to make a lesson plan or what is a lesson plan. Now, first of all, we cannot go directly to talk about lesson plan and what you have to include in a lesson plan. It's better to talk about general ideas about lesson plan. What is a lesson plan? Okay, all right. So when we talk about a lesson plan is a kind of, we can consider it as a road map. And when I say a road map, which means it is a guideline, it guides you throughout the whole lesson, where to stop, what to do in this phase, what not to do here, etc. So that's what we mean by a roadmap. So it is a very important thing in teaching. Another very important thing related to lesson plan is that it's very important for novice. It is very important for novice teachers. And when I say novice teachers, those who don't have experience in teaching. Another very important thing related to lesson plan. So a lesson plan, as you can see here, it is a kind of details, okay? It is a kind of details about how and what, okay? What to teach and how to teach it. So it is details about what to teach and how to teach that. Something else very important related to lesson plan is that it gives you a kind of confidence. When you go to a classroom teaching with a lesson plan, you feel confident. But if you go to a classroom teaching without preparation, without lesson plan, without knowing how and what to teach, that will create a problem and kind of confusion and also anxiety while teaching. But lesson plan, with a lesson plan, this means that you prepared the lesson and that will give you a kind of confidence. So this is very important. So a lesson plan is a roadmap. It is important, is very crucial for novice teachers. It is a kind of details about how and what to teach, and it gives you a kind of what we call confidence. There is something very important, and we can also include it. It has to do with time management. So when you prepare a lesson, you manage the time. It's very, very important for managing the time while teaching any lesson, not to skip a certain phase in the lesson or to have extra time at the end of the session. So that's what we mean by time management. So lesson plan is very, very important for classroom management. Now, before preparing a lesson, there are three important things that you have to take into consideration and think about them, prepare them. Number one is what we call objectives. Now, when I say objectives, which means what do you want your student to learn or what do you want your student to do at the end of the lesson? This is what you mean by objectives. So you cannot teach a lesson if you do not set the objectives of those lessons. What do you want your student to learn, or what do you want your student to be able to do at the end of the lesson? And therefore, here we'll talk about objectives. By the way, when we talk about objectives, we talk about either behavioral. When I say behavioral objectives, it means what you want your student to do. For example, you want your student to use the present simple, for instance, or to use the verb to be. That's a kind of behavioral. But if we talk about knowledge, that's something to learn, to get, for example, to learn new words, new expressions, etc. That's a kind of knowledge. But when we talk about behavioral, which means what you want your student to do by the end of the session. Activities. So when we talk about activities, which means the activities you want to include in the lesson so as to help your student achieve the goals or reach the objectives of this lesson or the lesson you are teaching. The last one is assessment, and assessment is a kind of ways to check whether the objectives were achieved or not, whether the activities were successful or not. This is what we mean by assessment, which means, in other words, to check whether your student learned something or not. And this is something that you can do different ways, for example, through quizzes, short quizzes, or even exercises, short exercises at the end of the session. So for assessment, it's up to the teacher to check whether his or her objectives, the lesson's objectives were met or not. So these are the three very essential steps that you have to consider before preparing a lesson plan: objectives, activities, and assessment. We will go back again to this to talk about this in details. Now, this is a format of a lesson plan. It's very important to know this format. By the way, if you check on the internet, you might find different formats, but this is the most common one. So when we talk about the first one, so as you can see, the date and the level or class. Class, is it Common Core, Baccalaureate, First Baccalaureate, Beginners? It depends on the class you are teaching. And lesson, the lesson you want to teach, and the topic. For example, if the lesson is something to do with grammar, the topic might be, for example, present simple. That's what you mean by the topic. And when we talk about skills, which means the skills you are integrating in the lesson, do you focus only on one skill or different skills? For example, if you target and involve only one skill, for example, reading, that you're going to write here reading. If you write reading, listening, listening, speaking, and writing, etc., you can also include integrating skills. This is for skills. Now let's go to the objective. So the objective is what we talked about before. And when I say the objective, it's better to start with, for example, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to write your objectives. Will be able to. So by the end of this lesson, student will be able to, for example, here the present simple, will be able to use the present simple appropriately, will be able to distinguish or differentiate between affirmative and negative form of the present simple, will be able to talk about the, we can say, routine, for instance, if you focus only on routine or habit as far as present simple is concerned. These are the objectives. So it's up to you to set the objectives that you want to achieve and that you think the objectives are achievable. Now, for materials, what are the materials you are going to use? Realia, pictures, a textbook, worksheet, data show, etc. You write them here, okay? Here, it's a very important part. So as you can see, we have stages, we have activities. Sometimes you might find content. It's also correct. Techniques and interaction or mode of work and timing. So stages. And when we talk about stages, it depends on what you teach. It depends on what you teach. Are you teaching listening or vocabulary or writing or reading? So each lesson, each skill has its own stages. So stages depend on the lesson and depend also on the framework you are employing. Okay, so this is my stages. Another very important thing, so when we talk about stages, we have two stages, very common, two common stages in all lessons, that are the warm-up and the lead-in. So a warm-up is to warm your student up, okay? Is to warm your student up. It can be through a kind of proverbs, pictures, quotes, it depends. So it's kind of warming your student up, and leading is what leads your student to the lesson. For example, if the lesson here is present continuous and you are revising the verb to be, that's a kind of leading your student to the lesson. If you are teaching present simple and you show them this picture, so here it is kind of warm up, because this picture has nothing to do with present simple. But if you are teaching, for example, vocabulary, food, and you show them this picture, this can be a lead-in to the lesson. It can also be considered as a warm-up if you intend, if you mean to warm your student up. So this is what we mean by warm-up and lead-in. For the other phases, it depends on the lesson. Is it a grammar? Is it vocabulary? Is it reading? Is it writing? So it depends. Each lesson, each skill has its own specific stages that you have to follow and you have to take into consideration. Not only this, it also depends on the frameworks. So it depends on the framework you are using. So that's very important. Now let's go to activities. So when we talk about activities, here what you are going to do in the lesson. You can write them in a paragraph or in form of notes. For example, teacher shows the picture, students describe, the teacher illustrates. So these are things that you have to write in a form of note. Something else very important, each stage there are activities, there are things to do for each stage. All right, so it depends on the lesson and depends on the stages, and it depends on the activities you designed for accomplishing the objectives. Techniques. So here, as I said before, some people might prefer to write them in the form of paragraph. There is no harm in that. Techniques, so the techniques you use in each stage. So for example, you might show a picture to student, and when you show a picture to student, that's a kind of picture description. So students are going to describe the picture and you elicit, then you might monitor, which means it's up to you to give the floor to each one, or you move around the class to check whether students are working, etc. That's a kind of monitoring. When you put students in groups or in pairs, that a kind of collaboration. Sometimes you might ask student questions, or students ask each other questions and answer. That's ask questions, answers, thinking. Sometimes you might give time to students to think and write on a board. Sometimes you might write on the board something, or students themselves write on the board. So these are, sometimes you might ask students to read silently, to skim, to scan, etc. That's a kind of techniques in reading. Now, interaction, sometimes you might find a mode of work, and when we talk about mode of work, that can be a kind of group work or pair work or individual work. Interaction, teacher-student, when teachers speak and students respond. Student to teacher, sometimes student might ask teacher questions or might respond to teacher. Student, this is when you put students in groups or in pairs. So this is interaction. Timing, this is very important. You have to allocate, specify time for each phase. For example, here you might give this 3 minutes, 5 minutes. It depends on your lesson and it depends on the time you have. So you have to give the time for each phase. And if you are a novice teacher, you should stick to the timing, because if you deviate, if you don't stick to the timing, you will have a problem in the lesson, and maybe your activities will not completed, your stages will not be completed, and therefore objectives will not be met. Assessment. Assessment very simply means what you do to check whether your objectives were met or not. That's very simple. So it can be a kind of questions, it can be a kind of small exercises or small tasks to do, it can be a kind of small quiz, etc. The last one, homework. By the way, there are some people who consider homework as non-pedagogical, so it's up to you to decide whether to give some extra homework to your student or not. And by the way, students don't like homework. That's very common. So it depends on you and it depends on your student. So this is a lesson plan. This is something that you have to take into consideration before preparing a lesson plan. And by the way, we will go back again to talk about this in detail, especially activities, techniques, and also stages. I hope you find this easy to learn and help you find something beneficial for you here. If you have any question or suggestion, don't hesitate to let me know. See you in another episode with another lesson. Have a good time and goodbye.